voice saying her name broke her completely. Lois Maclean had spent 6 months disappearing. 6 months rewriting herself. 6 months pretending her heart hadn't stayed behind in a glass tower in Manhattan. And now Duane Cunningham was standing in her aunt's driveway in Millhaven, Tennessee, looking like he'd walked straight off the cover of Forbes, and all of it unraveled in 4 syllables. Lois. She gripped the porch railing of Blue Ridge Haven, the bed and breakfast her Aunt Pearl ran tucked into the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. Her other hand moved, instinctively, to the curve of her belly. 7 months. She was 7 months along, and he was here, and her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it from the driveway. How? She managed, her voice barely a whisper. Duane's jaw was tight, but his storm-gray eyes were soft in a way she hadn't expected. Does it matter? He stepped closer. I've had people looking since the day you walked out. Private investigators. Data analysts. I came close to firing my entire security team when they couldn't find a trace of you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You were very thorough. I didn't want to be found, she said. I made that clear in my resignation. Family obligations require my immediate departure. He quoted her exact words, his voice controlled but his eyes telling a different story. Is that what you call this? His gaze dropped briefly to her rounded belly, then back to her face. The hurt beneath those words caught her off guard. She had braced for his anger. She had prepared herself for cold corporate calculation. The man who'd built Cunningham Capital Group into a billion-dollar empire from scratch didn't do messy emotions. He solved problems. This wasn't that. This was something rawer. Something she hadn't dared to hope for. Have you ever stood at the exact crossroads between protecting yourself and risking everything for love you never let yourself believe was real? Lois Maclean had made the bravest choice she knew how to make. She chose herself and her child. But sometimes the people we run from are running toward a truth they've only just discovered. This is that story. Years earlier, Lois Maclean had walked into the gleaming lobby of Cunningham Capital Group with nothing but a well-worn resume and enough determination to fill the entire building. At 29, she had built a solid reputation as an executive coordinator at a mid-sized financial firm in Brooklyn. But landing an interview at one of Manhattan's most aggressive private equity firms, the company that had reshaped 3 industries in under a decade, felt like reaching for something that shouldn't be touchable. The 70th floor executive suite took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows framing the entire Manhattan skyline. The Hudson glittering in the distance. And behind the desk at the center of it all, Duane Cunningham. He was younger than she'd expected for a man of his reputation. Mid-40s, with silver-threaded hair worn short, the kind of build that suggested he still worked out like he was angry at something, and eyes the color of a winter storm that missed absolutely nothing as they scanned her resume. Your references are strong, he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who never had to repeat himself. But they don't tell me why you want this particular position. Lois had steadied herself. Because I don't just want a job, Mr. Cunningham. I want to be part of something that actually matters. Your company doesn't just move money, it reshapes markets. I want to contribute to that vision, even in a supporting role. Something shifted behind those storm-gray eyes. Surprise, maybe. Recognition. Most candidates lead with the salary, he observed. I'm not most candidates, she replied simply. The smallest smile crossed his lips. The first crack in his formidable exterior. No, Ms. Maclean. I don't believe you are. She started the following Monday. Their professional rhythm established itself quickly. Lois anticipated needs before they arose. Black coffee in the mornings, sparkling water after 2 p.m., meetings front-loaded to when his focus was sharpest. She learned his tells. The tightening at the corner of his jaw when a presentation was going south, the particular silence that meant he was 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. In return, he gave her increasing trust and responsibility. You make everyone in that room better, he told her once after she'd quietly saved a near disaster with overseas investors. The compliment warmed her more than it should have. By her second year, she was indispensable. By her third, she'd begun noticing things about Duane Cunningham that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. The way he stood at the window when he was deep in thought, the rare laugh that transformed his whole face, the gentleness with which he spoke to the older woman who cleaned the executive floor each evening. By her fourth year, Lois had quietly accepted the truth. She was in love with her boss. By her fifth, she had become an expert at hiding it. "You're burning yourself out for a man who probably doesn't know your middle name," her friend Dana had told her over cocktails one Friday night. Lois had smiled and said nothing. Because Duane did know her middle name, Renee, after her grandmother. Just as she knew, he visited his late father's grave on the first Sunday of every month. Always alone. Just as she knew, he stirred cream into his coffee after brutal board meetings. A small, private comfort he allowed himself when no one was watching. Except Lois, who saw everything. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was whether he saw her as anything more than the perfect executive coordinator. Until the night of the Cunningham Foundation Gala. The annual Cunningham Foundation Gala was Manhattan's crown jewel of charity events, a night that raised millions for youth education programs and drew the city's most powerful names under one roof. Lois had orchestrated every detail. The champagne selection, the floral arrangements, the seating chart that strategically placed potential donors within Duane's orbit throughout the evening. "You've outdone yourself," Duane murmured as they stood at the entrance of the grand ballroom at the historic Sterling Hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast a honeyed glow over tables adorned with ivory dahlias and gold accents, the city skyline blazing beyond the windows. Lois, for once not in her usual professional attire but in a midnight blue gown that traced her curves, felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Just doing my job." "No," Duane said, his storm-gray eyes holding hers with an intensity she hadn't seen directed at her before. "This isn't just your job. This is exceptional. You are exceptional, Lois." The evening blurred into champagne toasts and record-breaking auction bids. Lois circulated efficiently, ensuring everything ran smoothly. But something had changed between them, a heightened awareness, a gravitational pull that kept bringing them back to each other across the crowded room. When the orchestra began playing after dinner, Duane appeared at her side. "Quick pause. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe and comment your favorite part of the story, as this encourages me to create more interesting episodes like this. Now, let's dive right into the rest of the story. Dance with me." Not quite a question. Not quite a command. On the dance floor, his hand at the small of her back felt like something electric through the silk of her gown. "You never join the dancing at these events," she managed. "I never had a reason to," he replied quietly. One dance became three. Champagne flowed. As the crowd thinned into the early morning hours, Duane leaned close, his breath warm near her ear. "Come up to the penthouse suite with me. There's a Bordeaux I've been saving for the right occasion." 5 years of carefully maintained boundaries whispered caution. But the warmth in his eyes, the rare vulnerability in his invitation, made her nod. The penthouse suite, with its panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline glittering like scattered diamonds, felt intimate despite its grandeur. They stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wine barely touched, the city spread before them like a secret. "Do you know how rare you are, Lois?" Duane asked quietly. "I want things too," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me," he urged, stepping closer. "What does Lois Maclean want?" The truth spilled out before she could stop it. "You. I've wanted you for so long." The confession hung between them for one breathless moment. Then Duane closed the distance, his lips finding hers with a hunger that suggested he'd been holding back just as long. That night, in the soft glow of the city lights, Duane showed a tenderness that contradicted every ruthless headline ever written about him. His hands, accustomed to signing 9-figure deals, traced her curves with reverent care. His voice, built for boardrooms, whispered her name like a prayer. For those precious hours, every wall he'd ever built came down. Morning brought reality crashing back. Lois woke to find Duane already dressed, taking a call by the window, his voice back to the clipped, authoritative tone she knew so well. When he noticed she was awake, he ended the call and crossed to the bed, his expression carefully neutral. "I have to fly to Chicago for an emergency board meeting," he said. "The plane's waiting. We'll talk when I get back tomorrow." He kissed her, briefly, but with an intensity that suggested this had meant something. Then he was gone, leaving Lois alone with rumpled sheets, a stunning view, and a heart full of questions. The next 6 weeks passed in a confusing blur. Duane returned from Chicago only to immediately leave for London, then Singapore, then Dallas. A relentless cycle of deals that kept him away for all but scattered days. During those brief windows, their professional dynamic remained outwardly unchanged, but stolen moments in his office or the back seat of his car were charged with something neither of them named. They never talked about what was happening between them. Never defined it. The words, "I love you," built inside Lois like pressure behind a dam. Then came the morning sickness. At first she blamed stress, the long hours, the emotional complexity of her impossible situation. But when her cycle failed to appear for the second month, she could no longer push the thought away. The pregnancy test, taken in the bathroom of her modest Prospect Heights apartment, confirmed it with 2 unmistakable pink lines. Lois sat on the edge of the tub for a long time, the test still in her trembling hand, trying to imagine telling Duane. The timing was catastrophic. Cunningham Capital Group was in the middle of its largest acquisition in company history. Duane was working around the clock, his focus absolute, his stress levels quietly monumental. And beyond the immediate circumstances, there was the fundamental question that had haunted her for years. What did she actually mean to him? A memory surfaced with painful clarity. They had been working late one evening when news broke of a competitor's messy divorce. "That's exactly why I'll never marry," Duane had said, barely glancing up from his screen. "Family, children, they're distractions I can't afford. The company is my legacy." At the time, she'd filed it away as insight into her enigmatic boss. Now those casual words landed like stones. For 3 days she wrestled with her decision, running through every possible scenario. Would he see the baby as a complication to be managed? Would he arrange a quiet settlement and an NDA? Would he accept out of obligation rather than love? None of those possibilities felt like the life she wanted for her child. She wanted a baby born from real love. She wanted a partner who chose her, not circumstances that forced his hand. On the 4th day, Lois made her choice. With shaking hands she typed her resignation, citing family obligations requiring her immediate departure. She withdrew her savings, erased her digital footprint as carefully as she could, and booked a one-way ticket to Millhaven, Tennessee, to Blue Ridge Haven, the bed and breakfast her Aunt Pearl ran tucked into the foothills of the Smoky Mountains. The one place that had always felt like safety. The one place far enough from Manhattan to breathe. The morning she left, before dawn, she placed her resignation letter and key card on Duane's desk. She allowed herself one moment of weakness, one hand on the cool surface of his desk, remembering the night he'd pulled her close and whispered how long he'd been waiting. "Goodbye, Duane," she whispered to the empty office. Her free hand moved to her still flat stomach. "I'm sorry." Then she walked away. The elevator descended 70 floors. And Lois Maclean disappeared from his world entirely. Millhaven, Tennessee received Lois with open arms and no questions asked. Aunt Pearl, a vibrant 64-year-old with silver-streaked natural hair and laugh lines carved deep from decades of joy, simply pulled her niece into a long, wordless hug when Lois appeared on the porch of Blue Ridge Haven with a single rolling suitcase. "You stay as long as you need," Pearl declared, leading her to the cozy yellow bedroom overlooking the mountain lake. No arguments. That first evening over homemade sweet potato soup, Lois told her everything. The pregnancy. Her feelings for Duane. Her fear of becoming an obligation to a man whose life plan had never included a family. Pearl listened without judgment, her weathered hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. "You've always had good instincts, baby," she said finally. If you felt you needed to go, I trust that. But running from pain usually just means delaying it. I'm not running from pain. I'm protecting my baby from becoming a corporate inconvenience. Pearl's gaze was gentle but knowing. And have you considered that you might be wrong about how he'd react? That you might be protecting yourself from a rejection you're only imagining? Lois had no answer for that. Days turned into weeks, and she found her rhythm at Blue Ridge Haven. She helped Pearl with breakfasts, tended the cottage gardens, welcomed guests, and quietly became essential to the inn's daily operations. Her marketing background proved valuable. She refreshed the website, ran the social media, and attracted a new wave of guests to the little lakeside retreat. As her body changed and grew round with new life, Lois found unexpected peace in Millhaven's unhurried pace. Morning walks along the mountain lake. Community suppers in the town square. Friendly neighbors who accepted her story of being a recently relocated marketing consultant seeking fresh air and a fresh start. All of it created a cocoon of normalcy that helped tend to the Manhattan-shaped wound in her heart. At her 20-week ultrasound in the regional medical center, Lois learned she was having a boy. Alone in the examination room, watching the grainy image on the monitor, she allowed herself to imagine Duane beside her. His stern face transformed by wonder. The fantasy was so vivid it left her gasping with grief for what might have been. "I'll name you Marcus," she whispered to her unborn son that evening, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and rose. "After my father. He was the kindest man I ever knew. I hope you inherit that from him." She didn't say out loud what she was also thinking, that she hoped Marcus would inherit Duane's relentless mind, his quiet determination, his rare but transformative smile. That despite everything, she wanted her son to carry the best of his father into the world. Summer softened into a glorious Tennessee autumn. The maple trees surrounding Blue Ridge Haven blazed with color, and the mountain lake took on a deep jewel blue hue that made Lois understand why people drove hours just to see it. At 6 months along, visibly pregnant and settled into her new life, Lois was arranging chrysanthemums on the wide front porch on a particularly beautiful October afternoon when a sleek black Range Rover pulled into the gravel driveway. The vehicle was jarringly out of place among the pickup trucks and modest sedans of Millhaven. Then the driver's door opened, and the world Lois had carefully rebuilt in the Tennessee mountains cracked right down the middle. Inside the lakeside gazebo where she'd led him for privacy, Lois watched Duane process the reality before him. His tall frame was silhouetted against the late afternoon light on the mountain lake, every line of him taut with controlled emotion. 6 months, he repeated, his voice quiet. A son. Something moved across his face, complex, unreadable. Then, more directly, "Why did you leave without telling me? Did you think so little of me that you assumed I wouldn't want to know about my own child?" "I thought I was sparing us both," Lois said, her hands resting protectively on her belly. "You made it clear years ago that children weren't part of your plan. That the company was your legacy. I didn't want you to feel trapped. So instead, you disappeared." His voice hardened. "No conversation. No chance for me to process this. No say in my own child's life. I was scared," she admitted. "Scared you'd see the baby as a problem to solve. Scared you'd accept it out of duty rather than love." Duane went quiet for a long moment, his gaze shifting to the lake where golden light danced across the water. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its edge, replaced by something raw. "Do you have any idea what it did to me when you left?" The question was almost conversational, but she could hear the pain beneath it. "I walked into my office and found your letter. 2 paragraphs ending 5 years of whatever we were. No explanation. No forwarding address. No response to anything." He turned to face her fully, and Lois was shocked to see the composed facade cracking. "I thought something had happened to you. I had security check your apartment. It was empty. Like you'd never existed." His voice broke slightly. "Do you know what that feels like? To have someone who's been part of every single day just vanish?" Lois hadn't allowed herself to imagine his reaction. She'd convinced herself he would simply replace her and keep building his empire without missing a step. "I'm sorry for how I left," she said softly. "But not for why. I needed to protect myself and my son." "An obligation?" He repeated the word like it tasted wrong. "Is that all you thought you were to me?" Before she could answer, he crossed the gazebo in 2 long strides and knelt before her. His eyes level with hers, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his irises. Could smell the familiar cedar and amber scent of his cologne. "I've spent 6 months searching for you," he said, his voice low and urgent. 6 months of emptiness and regret and realizing that without you, none of it, the company, the deals, the power, means a single thing. Lois's breath caught. "Let me finish." His hands hovered near hers but didn't touch, as if he feared she might disappear again. "I know I never said the words. I kept us in this undefined place, neither fully professional nor personal. That was my failure, not yours." He took a slow breath. "The truth is, I've been in love with you for years. Probably since your second week, when you told me I was making a mistake on the Hargrove deal and turned out to be completely right. No one talks to me that way. No one except you." Tears welled in Lois's eyes. Every wall she'd built in the last 6 months began to tremble. "I didn't know how to say it," Duane continued. "How to be who you deserved. So I kept you close without truly claiming you. And then you were gone, and I realized I'd lost everything that mattered because I was too afraid to be honest." "What truth?" she whispered, needing to hear it directly. "That I love you." His voice broke on the words. "That I want a life with you. That finding out about our child doesn't change that. It only makes clearer how wrong I've been about what matters." A tear slipped down her cheek. "You said children were distractions you couldn't afford." "I was wrong." He reached up and gently brushed the tear away, the first contact between them in 6 months, and it sent electricity straight through her. "So completely wrong about everything that matters." He glanced at her belly, then back to her face. "May I?" Lois nodded, unable to speak. Duane placed his palm gently against the curve of her stomach. As if on cue, the baby kicked, strong, decisive, unmistakable. Duane's eyes went wide. Wonder erased every trace of tension from his face. "He's strong," he murmured. "Like his father," Lois said softly. Their eyes met. And in that moment, 6 months of separation seemed to collapse into a single point of connection. "I'm not asking you to come back with me today," Duane said, his voice gentle but steady. "I know I have to earn your trust. Prove that I mean what I'm saying. But please, Lois, give me the chance to be part of this. To be the man you both deserve." The sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. This wasn't the calculating executive she'd known in Manhattan. This was Duane stripped of his armor, vulnerable and honest in a way she'd only ever glimpsed in their most intimate moments. "I need time," she said finally. "This is a lot." Duane nodded and slowly withdrew his hand. "I've taken a room at the Mill Haven Lake Inn in town. I'll be here as long as it takes." He stood and straightened his suit, a gesture so familiar it made her heart ache. "Whenever you're ready to talk about the future, I'll be waiting." As he turned to leave, Lois called after him. "How did you actually find me?" He paused at the gazebo entrance, a hint of his old confidence returning in the curve of his lips. "Your aunt's sweet potato biscuits." "What?" "You mentioned them once. Said they were the best in Tennessee and worth a 2-hour drive from anywhere." I remembered the town. His expression softened. "I remembered everything you ever told me, Lois. I just wish I'd shown you how much those things mattered before it was almost too late." That evening, Lois sat with Aunt Pearl on the back porch of Blue Ridge Haven, watching darkness settle over the mountain lake. "He seems sincere," Pearl observed, sipping her chamomile. "And completely in love with you." "He's always been persuasive." It's how he built his empire. There's a difference between persuasion and truth, baby. I've seen enough of both in 64 years to tell them apart. She reached over and patted Lois's hand. The question is, what do you want? Not for the baby. For yourself. Lois watched a star appear over the dark ridge of mountains. I want to believe him, she admitted. Then maybe start there. The next morning, Lois walked into town. The Millhaven Lake Inn sat at the edge of Main Street. White clapboard siding, blue shutters, quintessentially Tennessee. She found Duane on the back deck overlooking the water, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear as he stared out at the lake. Even here, hundreds of miles from his empire, Duane Cunningham was still running things. Some things didn't change. But when he caught sight of her, everything changed. Immediately and completely. He ended the call mid-sentence, set the phone face down, and stood. The CEO vanished, replaced entirely by the man who had knelt before her the day before. Lois. Her name in his mouth held warmth she'd missed more than she'd let herself acknowledge. I wasn't sure you'd come. Neither was I, she said, joining him at the railing. But we need to talk. Really talk. About what comes next. He closed the laptop without a backward glance. Whatever you need. I'm listening. Something about those two words, I'm listening, from a man who had always dominated every room he entered, struck her as the most significant thing he'd said yet. If I came back to New York with you, she began carefully, what would that actually look like? However you want it to look. Your own place if you need independence. Or, he hesitated with uncharacteristic uncertainty, you could stay with me. Not as an obligation. Because I want you there. Because I've missed you every day for 6 months. And Marcus, she pressed. How does he fit into your vision? Duane repeated the name with something like wonder. Marcus. A small smile. Good name. A strong name. His gaze was steady, sincere. As for how he fits into my vision, he is my vision. You both are. I know that sounds like something I'd say to close a deal, but these months without you have shown me exactly what matters. What I can't live without. Your company has always been your first priority, Lois said quietly. 16-hour days. Constant crises. That doesn't leave much room for 3 a.m. feedings and pediatrician appointments. Then my priorities change, Duane said simply. The company can run without my constant presence. I've built a strong team, I've just been too controlling to let them prove it. He stepped closer, not quite touching, but near enough that she felt the warmth of him. I'm not claiming I'll become the perfect father overnight. But I'm willing to learn. To adapt. To become whoever you both need me to be. Lois studied his face, searching for any sign of calculation. Instead she found only openness. Vulnerability. A hope so raw it was almost painful to witness. Come back with me, he said quietly. Not permanently. Not yet. Just until the baby comes. Let me show you who I can be. If I fail, if I can't be what you and Marcus need, you come back to Millhaven and I won't argue. I promise. The proposal hung between them. Reasonable. Unexpected. A trial period. A chance for Duane to prove himself without Lois having to bet everything on words alone. I need to talk to Aunt Pearl first, she said finally. And sleep on it. Of course, he nodded. However long you need. That evening, after a long conversation with Pearl and a slow walk along the lakeshore, Lois made her decision. I'll come back to New York with you, she said the next morning, finding him at the same spot on the inn's deck. Until the baby is born. To see if what you're offering is real. The joy that transformed Duane's face was almost too much to witness. Genuine. Unrestrained. Completely unlike the controlled executive she'd spent 5 years studying. You won't regret this, he said, reaching for her hands, then stopping just short, still uncertain of his welcome. "When do you want to leave?" "Tomorrow. I need today with Aunt Pearl." He nodded and finally, carefully, took both her hands in his. The contact sent warmth flooding through her, a connection she'd missed more than she'd admitted to herself. "Tomorrow, then. We'll drive back together." The following morning was clear and crisp, the Smoky Mountains at their October best. Aunt Pearl embraced Lois fiercely, then surprised Duane by hugging him as well. "Take care of them both," Pearl told him, her tone leaving no room for anything but yes. "And bring them back to visit. This place is part of Marcus's heritage too." "I will," Duane promised. And Lois believed him. They drove north along the Appalachian Corridor, miles of highway unrolling before them. In the comfortable interior of the Range Rover, with the Tennessee hills giving way to Virginia landscapes and then Maryland flatlands, they began the process of actually talking, about what had gone wrong, about their fears, about what they both hoped for. "I should have said something years ago," Duane admitted as the Manhattan skyline finally appeared on the horizon. "I kept waiting for the perfect moment, telling myself I needed everything in place first. And I should have been brave enough to ask for what I needed," Lois replied, "instead of assuming the answer before you gave it." The penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a gleaming tower in Midtown, with views of Central Park and the Hudson that took Lois's breath away. She'd never been to his home during their years together. Their relationship had existed in carefully controlled neutral territories. Stepping into the vast open-plan living area now, she glimpsed a side of Duane she hadn't fully seen. The space was warmer than she'd expected. Worn leather sofas, bookshelves filled with heavily annotated volumes, framed family photographs on side tables. "It's not what I expected," she said, running a hand along a shelf. "What did you expect?" "Chrome. Glass. Furniture that looks impressive and feels like punishment." A shadow crossed his face. "That was my first place. The one I bought when the company went public. All ego and steel." He gestured around them. "I moved here 3 years ago. I wanted something that felt more like," he hesitated. "Like what?" "Like somewhere a family could live," he finished quietly. "Even though I told myself, and everyone else, that wasn't what I wanted." The weeks that followed established a new rhythm between them, tentative at first, then increasingly comfortable. Duane genuinely implemented the changes he'd promised. He delegated more aggressively to his executive team, established firm limits on his working hours, and cut his travel to day trips when possible. Most surprising of all, he started cooking. "I didn't know you could cook," Lois said the first time she walked into the kitchen and found him carefully pan-searing salmon, sleeves rolled up, tie abandoned. "I couldn't," he admitted. "Apparently there are cooking classes and a thing called YouTube. Turns out running a company isn't so different from following a recipe. Attention to detail, proper timing, quality ingredients." "And what inspired this particular skill development?" His eyes met hers over the sizzling pan. "The research said omega-3s are important for brain development, and that you might be too tired to cook in your 3rd trimester. So..." He shrugged as though cooking for a pregnant woman was the most natural thing a billionaire could do. They shared meals, watched films on the deep sectional sofa, and took slow weekend walks in Central Park. Duane attended every prenatal appointment, asking thoughtful questions and taking notes in the same leather journal he used for board meetings. But they maintained separate bedrooms. The physical intimacy they'd once shared remained on hold, replaced by a different kind of closeness, built on conversation, on shared anticipation of their son's arrival, on the slow, steady rebuilding of trust. At night, lying in her room, Lois often found herself wondering what Duane was thinking down the hall. Whether he too lay awake remembering. But he never pushed. He seemed to understand that the most important thing he could do right now was exactly what he was doing, showing up. Consistently. Without drama. December, at 8 months pregnant, Lois accompanied Duane to Cunningham Capital's holiday party, a rooftop event at a midtown skyscraper that overlooked the entire city. Duane had wanted her there. Not as his former coordinator, but as the woman in his life. The mother of his son. "He's changed," observed Simone Okafor, the company's chief financial officer, appearing at Lois's side with a glass of sparkling cider. Simone was elegant and sharp and had worked alongside Duane for 12 years. "Has he?" Lois said carefully, watching Duane across the room as he chatted with board members, his hand discreetly checking the phone where they'd installed a contraction timing app just in case. 6 months ago he would have been working every person in this room like a chess match, Simone said. Tonight he's checked his watch 4 times in 20 minutes. I'm fairly certain he's already calculated the fastest route to the hospital from here. Lois smiled, watching as Duane gracefully extracted himself from the conversation and made his way back to her. "He's trying," she acknowledged. "More than trying. I've known this man for over a decade. I've never seen him delegate the way he has these past few months. He's leaving before 7 most nights. Taking weekends off." Simone gave her a measured look. "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." Duane Cunningham with work-life balance turns out to be even sharper than Duane Cunningham the workaholic. "We're having our best quarter in 6 years. Before Lois could respond, Duane reappeared, his hand coming to rest naturally at the small of her back. "Everything okay?" he asked, eyes scanning her face for any sign of discomfort. "Perfect," Lois said. And she meant it. 2 weeks before her due date, the peaceful routine shattered. Lois woke at 2 in the morning to sharp, purposeful pain. She lay still for a moment, trying to determine if this was another false alarm. It wasn't. These contractions had intention behind them. She reached for her phone. Hesitated, not wanting to wake Duane unnecessarily. But before she could decide, another contraction gripped her hard enough to make her gasp. She didn't need to call out. Somehow, Duane was already in the doorway, alert despite the hour, no trace of sleep in his expression. "Is it time?" She nodded. He was beside her in an instant. "I'll get your hospital bag. The car already has the car seat installed. Can you walk, or should I carry you?" "I can walk," she said, touched by his readiness. "But it's probably too early to go yet. First babies take their time. Then we'll time contractions here until they're 5 minutes apart. I have 3 different timing apps loaded." Despite the pain, Lois laughed. "Of course you do." The hours that followed were a blur of increasing intensity and decreasing intervals. Duane sat beside her through every wave, timing, breathing with her, applying counter-pressure to her lower back, never once checking work messages or showing impatience with the unpredictable rhythm of early labor. By dawn, the contractions were 5 minutes apart. "It's time," she admitted as another one released its grip. Duane didn't need to be told twice. Came in white and furious. The drive to Manhattan General took 40 minutes in the worsening snow, normally 20. Duane navigated the icy streets with the same precise focus he brought to everything that mattered. At the hospital entrance he parked immediately in the drop-off zone and dared anyone to say a word about it as he helped Lois inside. Labor progressed faster than expected for a first-time mother. By mid-morning, Lois was fully dilated, her body working with breathtaking intensity. Through it all, Duane never left her side. He advocated fiercely when a shift change brought a nurse who seemed ready to dismiss Lois's preferences about monitoring. She said no internal monitoring unless medically necessary, he said, his tone making it very clear there would be no further discussion. "If you can't respect that, we'll need a different nurse." Lois, deep in the work of transition, registered his voice like an anchor in rough water. When it was time to push, Duane positioned himself behind her, supporting her weight, murmuring steadily in her ear. "You're the strongest person I've ever known. You're already doing this. Keep going, Lois." At 11:52 a.m., as the January blizzard raged outside Manhattan General's windows, Marcus Alexander Cunningham entered the world with a powerful cry and clenched fists, as if he'd arrived ready for whatever came next. The doctor placed him on Lois's chest. "He's perfect," Duane whispered, tears running unchecked down his face. You're both perfect." In that moment, watching Duane gaze at their son with raw, absolute love, Lois knew with certainty that this transformation was real. This wasn't obligation. This wasn't performance. This was a man experiencing the most profound thing that had ever happened to him. When the nurses suggested Duane might want to go home to rest while Lois and the baby slept, he declined quietly but firmly. "My place is here. With my family." Those two words, "my family," spoken without qualification or hesitation, brought fresh tears to Lois's eyes. They brought Marcus home 3 days later to a penthouse transformed. The nursery was fully stocked. But Duane had also set up a bassinet in the master bedroom, their bedroom now, as Lois had quietly moved her things there the morning they left for the hospital. It had felt as natural as breathing. Duane took paternity leave, shocking the financial world and quietly delighting his executive team. He handled night feedings. He bounced Marcus in a carrier while reviewing quarterly reports, the powerhouse CEO of Cunningham Capital Group soothing his newborn son between conference calls. "You don't have to do all this," Lois told him one evening, finding him rocking a fussy Marcus in the nursery while scanning documents on a tablet. "I don't want to miss a moment. Not after everything I almost lost." He glanced down at their son. "Besides, turns out I'm quite good at multitasking when properly motivated." As winter thawed into spring, they built a new normal. Duane returned to the office but maintained real hours. Lois began consulting remotely, building her own roster of clients on her own terms. They didn't discuss the temporary nature of their arrangement. Lois's agreement to stay until the baby came had long since passed, but neither of them mentioned it. They were simply building. A perfect May evening, Duane suggested dinner on the penthouse terrace. Lois stepped outside to find it transformed. String lights overhead. A small table set with fine china and crystal. At the center, white peonies, her favorite flower, which she couldn't remember ever mentioning to him. "What's all this?" she asked. "It's been exactly 1 year since the Sterling Hotel Gala," he said, taking her hand and leading her to the table. Lois's breath caught. She hadn't remembered the date. But Duane had, just as he'd remembered her casual mention of Aunt Pearl's biscuits. Just as he apparently knew she loved peonies. They ate slowly, talking easily, about Marcus's latest developments, about work, about everything and nothing. When dessert arrived, a perfect flourless chocolate cake, Duane reached across the table and took her hand. "I had a whole speech prepared," he said, his voice suddenly uncharacteristically nervous. "About how you changed my life. About how Marcus completed something I didn't even know was missing. About how these past months have been the happiest I've ever known, despite the sleepless nights." He stood, still holding her hand. "But I think what matters most is the simplest truth." He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. And then Duane Cunningham, who commanded boardrooms, who had built an empire from raw ambition, who the business press called the most controlled man in finance, knelt beside her chair. "I love you, Lois. I want to spend my life with you and Marcus. I want more children, if you do. I want Sunday mornings with Aunt Pearl's biscuits and winters by the fire and everything in between." He opened the box. The ring was stunning, a vintage oval diamond in a delicate antique setting that somehow perfectly matched everything she'd ever loved aesthetically. She would never have been able to explain to anyone how he knew. But he knew. "It was my grandmother's," Duane said. "The only woman I ever knew who was as strong and as compassionate as you are." Tears filled Lois's eyes as he lifted the ring from its box, holding it poised at the tip of her finger. "Lois Renee Maclean, will you marry me? Not because of Marcus, though he is the greatest gift you've ever given me. Not because it's expected, but because I cannot imagine my life without you at the center of it." She thought of the morning in her Brooklyn apartment, staring at 2 pink lines, certain she was protecting herself and her child. How close she had come to missing all of this. "Yes," she whispered. Then, more strongly, "Yes, Duane. Yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and rose to pull her into his arms, his kiss saying everything the words couldn't hold. When they finally separated, Lois rested her forehead against his. "I need to tell you something I should have said months ago." She looked up at him. "I love you. I've loved you for years. Through all of it, the fear, the running, the uncertainty, that never changed." His smile in the string-like glow was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. "Then we've wasted enough time already. Let's not waste any more." As if on cue, Marcus's voice came through the baby monitor on the table, right on schedule for his evening feeding. They both laughed. "I'll get him," Duane said, pressing one more kiss to her lips. "Stay. Enjoy the view." Lois turned to look out over the Manhattan skyline, the city lights reflecting in the Hudson far below. A year ago she had fled this city, this life, this man, certain she was protecting herself and her unborn child from heartbreak. Now, with Duane's grandmother's ring catching the light on her finger and their son's cries quieting as his father picked him up, she understood. Sometimes the greatest risk wasn't in staying. It was in running away from the possibility of love. 1 year later, on a perfect June afternoon, Lois stood in the garden of Blue Ridge Haven surrounded by wildflowers and the gentle sound of the mountain lake lapping at the shore. Aunt Pearl had insisted they hold the wedding here. "Where your journey together truly began," she declared, and neither Lois nor Duane had wanted to argue. They'd compromised, an intimate ceremony in Millhaven, followed by a lavish reception in Manhattan for Duane's business world. The best of both lives, just as their life together had become. Through the upstairs window, Lois could see guests gathering on the lawn. Duane's executive team mingling with Millhaven locals. Manhattan friends making easy conversation with Lois's cousins from Atlanta and Dallas. And at the center of it all, impossibly handsome in his tailored suit, was Duane, with 1-year-old Marcus perched on his hip, the baby's small hand patting his father's cheek with great authority. Aunt Pearl appeared in the doorway, resplendent in a deep rose dress. "It's time, Emmy. Your groom is already checking his watch." Lois laughed. "Some things never change." "Some things do, though," Pearl said softly, helping adjust Lois's veil. "That man down there is not the same one who drove into my driveway in that fancy SUV looking lost. He's better, happier, more human." "We both are," Lois agreed, taking her aunt's arm. "I never thought I could have all of it. Career, family, love. I always believed I'd have to give something up." "The best things in life don't require sacrifice," Pearl said. "They require courage. You had both, even when you couldn't see it." The ceremony was everything Lois had dreamed and never quite dared to hope for. Standing before their closest people, with Marcus toddling between them and Simone Okafor serving as his vigilant shadow, Lois and Duane exchanged vows they had written themselves. "I promise to remember that the strongest partnerships are built on honesty, even when honesty is hard," Duane said, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise to value your independence as much as your presence. I promise to be the father our children deserve and the husband you deserve, present, engaged, and grateful for every moment we share." Lois's vows came through tears she didn't try to stop. "I promise to trust your love even when fear whispers doubts. I promise to see you for who you are, not who I'm afraid you might be. I promise to build our family on honesty, respect, and the certainty that we are stronger together than we could ever be apart." When they sealed it with a kiss, cheers rose from the assembled guests. Marcus clapped both hands with tremendous enthusiasm, his father's storm-gray eyes bright in his mother's delicate face. The reception that followed was warm and joyful. Duane's city elegance softened by Millhaven's hospitality, the string quartet from Nashville giving way to dancing that mixed formal footwork with pure happiness. Late in the evening, Lois stood on the same porch where Duane had first found her, the porch where everything had begun to change. She watched Duane across the lawn, deep in easy laughter with her cousins, Marcus asleep now in Pearl's arms. "Penny for your thoughts," said Simone, appearing at her side with sparkling water. "Just marveling," Lois said. "If you'd told me 2 years ago I'd be standing here as Duane Cunningham's wife, with our son asleep inside and—" She stopped, smiled to herself. "And," Simone prompted, "and another baby on the way." Lois's hand moved to her still flat stomach. "I just confirmed it yesterday. I'm telling him tonight." Simone's eyes went wide, then delighted. "He'll lose his mind. In the best possible way." The board, on the other hand. "2 Cunningham paternity leaves in under 2 years, Lois finished, and they both laughed. Duane found her a few minutes later, slipping his arms naturally around her waist from behind. "Happy?" he murmured against her hair. "More than I have words for," she said. She turned to face him. "Walk with me." She led him down the familiar path to the lakeside gazebo, lit now with soft lights for the wedding, its white shape glowing against the dark water. Inside, she turned to him. "Do you remember what happened here?" His expression softened into something deeply tender. "I knelt before you. I felt our son move for the first time. I told you I loved you. And you have been everything you promised since that day," she said softly. "Every single day." "It always will be," he said, drawing her close. Lois took a quiet breath. "Our family is growing, Duane. Marcus is going to be a big brother. About 7 months from now." He went very still. Then his face transformed, pure, unguarded, radiant with a happiness she'd been the first person to ever draw out of him. "Another baby?" He cupped her face in his hands. "We're having another baby." She nodded, laughing through tears as he lifted her gently and spun her once, carefully, exuberantly, before setting her down. He knelt before her again, just as he had 18 months earlier in this same spot. His hands rested reverently on her stomach. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Your mom and dad already love you so much. Your big brother is going to be so excited to meet you." The tenderness in his voice confirmed, again, everything that had become true about this man. Not what he'd been forced to become, but what he'd chosen to be. On their 5th wedding anniversary, they returned to the gazebo at Blue Ridge Haven. This time with Marcus and Charlotte, their daughter, born 7 months after that June wedding, with her father's determination and her mother's spirit, racing ahead of them down the familiar path, their laughter carrying across the summer evening. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't found you?" Duane asked, watching their children at the water's edge. Lois considered it. Thought of the frightened woman who had disappeared from Manhattan to protect her heart. Thought of the controlled, isolated man who had built an empire but nearly missed building a life. "Sometimes. But then I look at all of this and I think we would have found our way back to each other eventually. Some things are stubborn that way." "How can you be so sure?" "Because some loves are meant to be," she said simply, "even when we try to run from them. And because the greatest journeys often begin with the bravest choices, even when those choices lead us right back to where we were always meant to be." Duane's arms tightened around her. "I spent a lifetime building walls," he said quietly. "You and our children tore them down and gave me something worth more than anything I ever built." Lois turned in his arms and kissed him, long, unhurried, grateful. "We found our forever," she whispered. And as Marcus's and Charlotte's laughter wove together with the soft lapping of the mountain lake, as the Smoky Mountains turned violet in the distance and the summer sky deepened to gold, Lois understood that this, all of this, was not the ending of her story. It was simply where the best part finally began. Hello again, lovers and billionaires. We have come to the end of today's story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think about today's story. I read every comment. Please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to enjoy more captivating stories like this. Until the next story, stay in love and leave billionaire level.